Steve Moran here with another episode of Foresight TV. Today I am talking to James Rhee. I actually think this may be one of the most pivotal episodes of Senior Living Foresight or Foresight TV that we've ever done. And we are going to get started with our conversation in just a moment. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. James, let me do a little bit of introduction to start with. James Rhee is a investor turnaround expert. I met him when he keynoted at the Argentum conference a few weeks ago. He gave an amazing talk that had such relevance to the senior living industry and what we can become. We had some phone conversations after that. And, well, James, let's just start with your story. I think that's the first place we need to do. I do want to say that we are going to open up the conversation to have those of you who are in the audience join us about halfway through. And I see we've got a couple of people who are in the waiting area already. I'm really excited about that. Leslie and Bob, I'm glad you're there. James and I are going to talk for a little bit, and then we're going to open it up in maybe 20 minutes. So, James, let's start with your story.
Hey, everyone. I met you and a lot of the senior living community out in Arizona, like 6 weeks ago?
6 weeks ago or something, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, as things happen in life, it was a bit of serendipity. And I realized that I should have known more about the industry before I just felt very welcome. And I understood the issues in listening to people for a couple hours after my talk. I'm James. I don't want to hog up the time here, but I tend to do things that are systems changing, people-centric, problem-solving things. And I bring to it many decades as an investor in growth and distressed. I'm an ex-attorney. I'm comfortable moving money, but I also am a former high school teacher. I'm currently the chair of entrepreneurship at Howard University, and on the faculty at MIT. And I also spent 7 years affecting a change of a company that has, I think, a lot of analogies to the issues that senior living is dealing with as a system right now that maybe could be helpful for this industry to think about.
Can you talk about, I think that for my audience, our audience here, to hear the turnaround story that you were responsible for, that you made happen, is, and I'm sure I don't have the language on that quite right. I think that story is really vital to setting the stage. So can you maybe share that?
Sure. So what Steve's referring to is that in 2013, I was ensconced in my Boston life as a private equity guy, so financial capital. And that has a role to play in senior living too. We'll talk about that later. And there was a company called Ashley Stewart, which is in the retail sector, which is a different sector. But if you think about it, it has a lot of analogies to this sector. I think the work that you all do is obviously much more, let's just say, critical. But analogies in the sense that it's intensive emotional work. You have a dedicated workforce. You've got overabundance of issues related to capacity and to traffic and to branding, and you have a very important workforce that sometimes feels a little bit obviated by tech gains, right? It's all of these issues, and you have a lot of diversity and gender issues as well, both sectors. So I was sitting there in 2013 on the board of a company, as I am, and Ashley Stewart was just a company. It's probably the size of some of your larger national chains, I would say, in terms of revenue size, maybe mid-large. And this brand catered to a certain demographic of Black women. So specifically plus-sized Black women, moderate income, urban neighborhoods, and was not doing very well. And the whole retail industry was not doing very well, even in 2013. It's accelerated a lot. And I thought that the company represented more than just a retail company. I don't think anyone who works in any of your adult centers now thinks of their centers just a place to work. There are real lives in there. It's a real community. It's years of friendships. It's life and death. And from my vantage point, this company, not to compare it to senior living, but there was a lot of life and death in these stores, emotional life and death and wellness and general brain wellness and emotional wellness. And the financial community undervalued it or didn't value it. And it had a lot of systems issues confronting it. So I left my life in Boston, what was supposed to be for just 6 months, to be a first-time CEO in massive distress. And I learned a lot about the ladies, about their resolve, about myself, about confirming my values. And I want you all to know that I will go into what I did and some of the steps that we did, but there wasn't a lot of help to be found. It was still a pretty splintered industry, hyper competitive. People had a mindset of just that way. And the financial community really was not interested in outcomes other than financial outcomes. And so I couldn't get a lot of help. And we had no Wi-Fi. We had no computers in the stores. And a lot of this probably resonates with some of your listeners listening, that it was tech challenged, but human centered. And that everyone knows that you can't rip out the heart of humans and just replace it with tech. It won't work in senior living. It doesn't work in retail either, right? So anyway, so long story short, I ended up spending 7 years there, and we sort of just transformed the company. And I'm going to correct you. I don't ever refer to it as a turnaround, which is what I want your listeners to really hear. I fundamentally approached it with a different mindset, almost like a scientist teacher, to really think about redefining terms and redefining the systems. I think that right now, when I observe humbly about this industry in senior living, it's not a matter of tweaking a couple Band-Aids and doing some things. I think there's a real opportunity to really just blue sky and have some courage and execute in a big way.
So talk to me a little bit about the lessons that let me back up. Let me start first with, you went into this with a couple of core principles as you took over the CEO role. And I think it's important to talk about those key principles before we talk about how you actually executed them.
Sure. You have to picture me. Everyone can see me. And it was a business predominantly serving and employed by Black women. And I had never done retail either as an operator. I've owned a lot of things as an investor, but you also have to picture the situation. People were angry. You had vendors screaming at the company. You had people. It was not a happy situation, right? The industry sort of not in good situation. High stress. People screaming at each other. People literally had to hire an armed security guard because the company hadn't been paying its bills. So the employees were worried about being hurt in the parking lot. And so amidst all of this chaos and 20 years of sort of losing money, I actually emphasized just two things, sort of in this voice, And I said, hey, I don't know everything. I want to learn. But in order to get through this, we're just going to rely on two transcendent things. So kindness and math. And I said, everything else, like, if they don't check both boxes, that it's not human-centered dignity and really understanding what the purpose of what we're trying to do here, right? It's providing dignity to this company. And it has to be mathematically sound too. If we can come up with a set of solutions and really redraw an idea, a business plan, a symphony, if we can have these principles governed by these two, kindness and math, I think we're going to have a good shot. So it was human-centered and mathematical. It was, I used to call it empathetic CRM or very emotional tech, that we never divorced humanity from some of the tough business decisions that we had to make. And I think this industry is starting to really confront those things headlong.
Yeah. Well, it is. So how did you go about making this happen?
So
I mean,
my first step.
what did you do when you walked in? I guess that's sort of the question, right?
Well, I walked in and big town hall, and I did a big call to the field as well. I told everyone who I was, why this was important to me. I said that this brand did more than people thought. And this industry that I'm talking to, you know what you're doing. Like, this is end of life dignity, and just like, this is a real service, right? This is wonderful work. There in retail is a little bit murkier, right? People said, what? We sell clothes. I said, I don't think so. I really don't think that's what you're doing. Like, we will be rewarded financially if we do our main purpose really well, which the best operators in this industry, they're saying, of course, that's what it is. But I didn't profess to know all the answers. I said that I would go on a listening tour, that I knew a lot of things, but that I wanted to hear. So I went on a 6-month listening tour. I spent most of my time actually in the field, like working in the stores and listening to the people that were directly touching the customers. So in your case, the caregivers. And I asked them how I could help, like in their lives, in their day-to-day lives, in their day-to-day work. And I just chronicled it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is, and as trust started to grow, they started really giving me, frankly, pretty immediately, they said, here are all the things that are going on. And we see all of these things, these fixes, these issues. What do you think? And I said, oh, wow, that's really interesting. So I wrote them. And then when I would go home late at night, I would sort of just connect all of these dots, sort of like It's a Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe, when he sort of looks at the stars and you're connecting them. So I just started connecting it much like maybe an artist would. Like, oh my gosh, the whole schema of the problems is that you can't fix all 100. But I think that these 3 lines connect 75 of them. And I focused on those 2-3 lines, and I just said, let's do this. Is everyone doing this? And I authored the plan. I wrote it mathematically, legally, and tech solutions, and said, does everyone agree? What do you think? And it sort of felt more like the Constitutional Convention in 1787, where it was co-authored by everybody.
Yeah. So there's a comment that's been put in that Melinda put up, and I'm going to put it up, and then I'm going to sort of see if I can frame it. Here's the question. I'd love to hear how the industry will raise wages for the caregivers. The turnover is a result of lower wages and unreasonable demands on the staff.
Yeah.
So let's assume that a REIT or a private equity company, organization, leadership there is watching our conversation, and it's likely that that's actually happening right now in real time. It will happen over the next week with the replay, and they listen to it and say, man, this guy could take this senior living organization that's in our portfolio, that's on its last breath, that we're ready to dismantle and farm out the properties. And I wonder if he could actually turn it into something really wonderful and special. And I know you're not actually out looking for that job, but let's just, we're going to play make believe here for a minute. If you were to go in as a CEO of a company like that, where would you start? And I want to give it to you in this context of this question here on the screen is the big challenge that everybody's facing.
Yeah. Well, I would look, first, again, I'm going to profess my wholehearted lack of, subject matter expertise in this industry. I'm reading a lot because I lost both my parents, as you know, right? So I've been through it as the son of 2 older people trying to have a dignified end of life. So the first part of what I said was the most important, which was the co-authoring. I really listened a lot. I really did. And I do that in most any situation I'm in. It's that you really have to hear. It's 90% listening. It's like, It's you feel like Oprah Winfrey almost. It's like, I got it. Okay. And then the 10% is just to say, listen, we're going to work on this together. There's nothing, like, there are no good fixes that happen in one day. They're not, right? You can't change an industry or a company in one day or 1 week. But what I did say is that you'll see substantial progress and milestones, just like Ted Lasso with fixing the shower. You will see things, but can you give me some time? Let's do it together and you will see what's going to happen. Like, can you do that with me? And I understand if you can't, like, I get it. Like, I can't do everything tomorrow. I don't know enough, but that's one thing. I think listening and this design thinking, or whatever you want to call it, like, it's not done enough. Two, I asked the people that were working there, like, what is it that you want? I think what you're seeing right now in turnover rates in every industry, not just here, money is important. There's a floor amount of money where you have escape velocity to have an existence that's not entirely stressful in survival mode. There are other things that people are demanding in terms of compensation. There's non-cash compensation like dignity, flexibility, fairness, recognition, meritocracy, care. I talked about kindness and love like, why wouldn't you? Like, these things, right? That can be translated into things like, let me give you a very tangible example. So I know in this industry, it's something that afflicts the retail industry too. It's like workers' compensation. Workers' compensation is the result of a couple things, many things: bad processes, not like that are not rigorous, and also like the training. Sometimes if it's not done right, people get hurt. The other thing is also that it's people not caring. Actually, whether it's the corporate office not caring about the well-being of their workers, or sometimes workers in the field saying, you know what, I'm hurt today. And we all know that. So that's one thing that I really focused on. I said, let's solve this problem together. Because at the time when I was sort of taking over that company, I couldn't even get insurance. I had to beg for it because the incidents were so bad. But we ended up all focusing as a collective on getting people safe. And I ended up as the CEO saying, I'm fully responsible for the workers' compensation. There's only one person, buck stops with the CEO. You get hurt, I need to know. And I'm sorry, like, you can't come to work and get hurt. Our incidents, and then we improved the processes. The incidents went down something like, it was like 90+% every year. And we ended up winning the highest award in workers' comp. But with that money, with the premium savings, it was a collective asset. And we took that money and I paid it out to the people that did it. So we were able to increase compensation because we had we saved money from premium.
Yeah.
And so it was a collective action of doing it together. And so, like, the wages, there's a lot of things stuck. And now I'm going to put my dorky private equity and MIT hat on a little bit. The way GAAP is, and I'm speaking about this as a pretty experienced investor, and like a lot of people running money at the REITs or whatever, they're trained at the business schools that teach them GAAP. There's a lot of money that's stuck in an income statement and a balance sheet that you're not taught about in school, and leaders aren't taught to manage this way. So worker comp is one specific example. Who's responsible for workers' comp in an organization? Does everyone know that it's a collective premium and that it's self-funding wages? Everyone should be compensated for the work they put in to lower risk. And it's real teamwork. Let me give you another example, like wages. I shut down my office when I got down to that company. I was like, do the retail clients care if their CEO has an office? And I'm like, no, it doesn't help the experience. So, like, from a caregiver standpoint, do your residents care if I have an office? So what I did is I took all that money in savings, and then when you reinvest it into your P&L, whether it's into higher wages or better equipment, that money grows, no different than a mutual fund. It compounds. And so all of these things is basically when you can dissect the purpose of this business and you take all the ancillary expenses that are not pushing forward that money, there's a lot of money locked in. You don't need to raise external. It's just locked. I can go on for hours. I don't think you want me to, but there's a lot of things from a very technical P&L and ops perspective, but it comes from a cultural perspective of saying, if this money is being spent not to further the experience of my frontline workers and the patient and the care and the residents, it's a waste of money.
So this is so fascinating to me. As I talk to operators, and this comment just sort of speaks to it. There's sort of this sense of, yeah, I know I need to pay more money, but there's just no money there. And yeah, I make a good salary and have a nice office and have these luxuries. But even if I stopped all of that, it wouldn't really make any difference. And so I might as well go ahead and do that. But what I think I'm hearing you say is there's actually big buckets of money in lots of little places that could really make a substantial difference for the frontline people, that would make their lives better, which would ultimately make the business better.
Yeah, because let's not to be, again, overly technical, but the way that a lot of finances are run in any industry, particularly one like this, in a human, like intensive, in a person intensive business, because GAAP doesn't require you to capitalize and create liabilities for turnover, and companies that do well on retention do not get credit from an EPS standpoint. It's just a weird fact of GAAP. So I often ask, who's in charge and compensated at corporate headquarters or in the company on retention? Show me. Because if you actually did your books really not GAAP, but actually correctly, better companies that retain their employees would have higher earnings, GAAP earnings.
Yep. Yeah.
But that's not how it's done. But you can do that. Whoever's listening in your company, you can create internal statements that are not GAAP compliant, that are actually relevant to how your business is run. Yeah. Which is what I do, which is what I did, right? I saw the other comment about the money and things like this. Yeah, this is where, like, it's called system dynamics. This is not a linear problem solve. Yeah. I mean, one of the other things that Ashley Stewart that I did, or in any situation, is like, you have to picture my background too, is that I'm a distressed investor, lawyer, growth investor, CEO, high school teacher. You wear all that, and I market. I'm a brand guy. You have to put all of it in a pot. The way a lot of companies are structured, I know how they are. Like the reports, there are 12 different reports, 12 different pairs of eyes. There are very few people who are looking at all of them at the same time. And so you all have to get together, like the movie Dave, the president with Kevin Kline, when he has his board together and he says, do you really need $50 million for this? Do you really need, and he saves the orphanage.
Right.
I don't see that dynamic in a lot of companies, not just in this industry.
Yeah. I think that sometimes we think that our problems are unique, and I think there are certainly some problems that are unique in our industry, but I think much of what we face is in much of the opportunity and the missing things are actually things that go across the board. There's one that I want to go back and talk for just a minute about your Ashley Stewart. Well, you talked about how the turnaround didn't happen overnight, but you actually got to profitability in a really short period of time, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's important, because when I talk to leaders, there's sort of this sense of turnaround's going to take 5 years to get there. And I'm personally, I think it can, maybe all the way there. Yes. But I think to make substantive differences, there's some really short-term things that could happen.
Yeah. Well, we took a company, it actually never made money, I think, for 20 years. And I think within 2 years, we did more in EBITDA than we paid for the assets of the entire company. So I think one of the things that we did, again, talking barbell. So on the big picture barbell, barbell only has, in the middle doesn't touch the ground, but the two ends of the barbell touch the ground. So on one end of the barbell, that was very important, just like kindness and math. On the big picture side, we got the culture right. It was an innovative culture. And it's counterintuitive when people feel safe. And I talked about kindness, about being able to express their opinion. It just unleashes creative solution making. You cannot have entrepreneurship and creativity in a hostile environment. And it doesn't work in any industry. So that's one, and you actually have to care, right? People are not idiots. Like you can tell if a leader or someone actually cares about your well-being. Like we're
That's right.
all adults at this point, particularly after the last 2 years. Like you can smell right away, right?
That's right.
The second thing is that I think it's important for this industry as well. We define purpose very broadly, and so they kept saying, "Oh, we sell clothes." I was like, "I don't think so." Oh, we have customers. Okay. But we define, I said, what happens if I told you that, like, let's broaden the definition of retail, which I think is something that this industry is going to, what's senior living? Is it just in the four walls of that housing complex that we have? Should it extend branding? Should it extend to before people come into that home? What's the relationship with this person before they even come? What's the relationship of senior living with the residents' family members? There's a much broader definition of wellness and senior living that I think that this industry can embrace. And when you start thinking that way, there may be parts of your existing ecosystem that are declining, but senior living, if you look at the demos of what's happening, it's exploding. It's a huge market and it's growing. I would encourage this industry to think that way. So at Ashley Stewart, I said, no, not just clothes. We ended up like producing like these national concerts and big searches and like, being an affiliate endorser of brands, of cosmetic brands, having modeling contests. Like nothing existed before I got there. Like, but I just said, we can translate this ethos and the purpose to much broader market share opportunities. And it actually helped catalyze the core business as well. So that's one thing that I would encourage this industry to do. But the second, like just getting on what your question about, you have to be, the math part's important too.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't like, you got to make you do have to make some tough decisions. I mean, like you have to think good bank, bad bank too, in terms of I'm sure everyone that's listening has a couple centers that are hemorrhaging, that don't make sense anymore. And you have to be honest with yourselves. And as much as you want to take care of everyone, like you can't make uneconomic decisions as well. So we made some short-term decisions that were important, like as any financier would do. But the real growth, it really came from a rethinking of what this industry, the problems that it was solving. And I think that's the most exciting part of this industry, is that the macro's there, the demos are there. I think you can really extend the experience of what you're trying to do, what you already do well, extending it outside of where you're doing it now.
Yeah. So I want to, yes, I'm just sort of some background, and we're going to bring some of the audience on here in a minute. What I'd like to do is, Dean, I'm going to start with you because you messaged me that you'd like to be on. Bob Kramer, you always have something to say, so I'm assuming you're there. If you'd like something to say, if you can turn your camera on, and I'll know that you want to be a part of the conversation. And if you don't, there's one person who's got their camera on, you should turn it off. Otherwise, you're going to end up on screen with everybody. And I'm actually going to drop the link in case you didn't get it. It was in the email that we sent out this morning. I put it in the chat, and I'm also just going to put it up on for a moment here on the banner. And with that, Dean, I'm going to bring you on now. And so you're up. Comments, questions.
This is pretty cool technology. Hi, Dean.
Yeah. The biggest thing, James, you have to be careful is you got this narrow view, so you're like you're cutting your face off, and you can move your head to the right. There, perfect.
Okay.
Dean, your mic is off. Mute. There we go.
You're on mute.
You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Well, Dean's finding unmute, but while he's finding his mute button, the other thing that was in the chat is that, now putting again on my investor hat, I can see the dynamic in my little short time of researching. But this industry, one of the comments was, well, people have to have a lower rate of return. Like people, and I want you to know, like, in my investment in life, as much as it sounds people-centered and like sort of, oh, that's so nice, I have returned over 100% per year to my investors, financial investors.
Yeah.
So these things, like, it's not, people have to stop thinking like if you're running great cultures like this, that you don't make a lot of financial return too. That's just not true. And I think that you can really distinguish yourself in that way. And the other thing I think is interesting in the industry is that the capital that needs to go into this industry, that's a broader conversation that I'm not prepared to have. I need to do more work, but it's a mixture of, I'm not surprised there's a for-profit, not-for-profit debate in this industry. I'm not surprised that there's a government public policy interesting debate about this. It's what type of capital, what type of return. And I think as a country, we're all facing that. This industry is front and center on that. Anyway.
Yep.
Steve, can you hear me?
Gotcha. Yep.
Okay. So I just wanted to comment, you asked the question, Steve, before what you would tell a REIT or a part of the business that is floundering or not doing well. And the biggest thing that comes to me, and I love everything that you're saying, I really do. We're in the caregiving business.
Yeah.
Our product is caregiving. And yet, and I've written an article on this, the biggest failing that our industry has had in the last 30 years is that we haven't evolved the caregiving position like everything else is evolved. And for many parts of the country and in many places, it's still the worst job someone can get, rather than it evolving into a paraprofessional job, whether it being a best first job, whether we have to take care of our caregivers as much or more than we take care of our residents. And for the last 30 years, I've run doing this for 30 years in 15 different communities. The mantra in all the conversations, resident, resident, resident. And, a few people say staff, staff, staff. And of course, and we're just not treating our people with human dignity so they could live a decent life, and professional dignity. And once you do that, that's got to be the first step.
I agree. I think that's when Steve and I were chit-chatting before this came on. So I am of the take care of your caregiver philosophy first. They take care of things. And then the reason why, when I met everyone in Arizona, it's a funny little vignette that there was a young lady that is a senior person at Argentum. I'm not going to mention her name in case she doesn't want to be mentioned, but they were interested in meeting more students at Howard. And I said, well, I'm the endowed chair of entrepreneurship at Howard. You're in DC. We're cutting a ribbons at the new Women's Center next week. You want to come? And she came. And this is the weaving. It's not an accident that I have time at Howard and MIT right now, because I think this industry, you're right, it is an entire conversation about future work, right? It's what type of education required, continuing ed, training. Does everyone need blank? I need to know more. But yeah, I think that, and it's also from a, throw in women and diversity conversation too.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
We have to address, you can address 8 of these issues at the same time and do it well, right? And then it should be that you will come up with a better solution. That's what I'm actually really excited about, because the more I get to understand this industry, I'm like, wow, because to relate it back to retail, the other thing that I've uncovered is the amount of the digital divide and how much that's created, not just with the REITs, but the digital divide with the sophistication and knowledge of digital marketing.
So I'm not going
to name any specific names. I was like, wow, I was shocked that.
Yeah. So Dean, I'm going to pull you off, and I'm going to go to Leslie, and then I'm going to go to Bob Kramer here. So.
Hi.
Leslie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for doing this. This is inspiring. Super happy to meet you. Something that's singing to me and just keeps on coming. It's just, if you build it, they will come. If you just think about, you're talking about doing the human stuff on the front end, and the money is going to come with it. We're in a human business, but we treat it very task driven at the community levels. Everything is task driven. And when we talk about taking care of caregivers, we think about how somebody gets into this business because they want to care for people. People don't become caregivers because they want to do the yucky stuff with the smells and the liquids and all that stuff. They get into it because they love this population. Yeah. So if we can honor that and really encourage the relationship-based caregiving and take away a little bit more from the task-driven caregiving. So that was one of the biggest things that I live there anyway, but I'm excited to be here and be able to share this with you and hear what you're talking about. Kindness doesn't cost money. When we talk about kindness and math, it does not cost money to talk to people in a kind way and to approach people in a way that provides dignity and encourages relationships and engagement. Yeah. The other piece, I think, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk over you. When we talk about engagement, and all of these companies know how important our engagement programs are, how important Life and Leisure is. We're writing books about it. We're touting it on our marketing plans, on our websites. We're promoting all of this engagement at the community level for our residents, but we have maybe one person who works full-time in the community doing activities for anywhere from 60 to 160 people. And our residents don't take nights and weekends off. We're looking at this in such a way that, you know, we put so much value here, quote unquote value, but we're not investing in that side of it. And so that taxes our care teams that much more. So I appreciate you giving me the platform. I'll stop talking.
Well, it doesn't surprise me, and I know it doesn't surprise you that you're in an industry that is over indexes. Let's just call it like vulnerable demos, older. I'm assuming this industry skews much more women. I'm assuming that there's a fair bit of representation of people of color, like in the front lines. Mm-hmm. That in those demos, a lot of the non-cash value, positive externalities, they're never valued. So it makes sense to me that there's a negative arbitrage in this industry, that all of the non-cash things that happen aren't valued correctly. And then when you throw in financial capital that's only valuing the yield, of course there's. So I think that what's going to happen, it sounds like it's happening in industry. You have hybrid capital coming in. That's saying, what's the return? And I want everyone to know that at least in my most successful investment, like Ashley Stewart, I went in there not expecting to do it. It was perfect. I was like, there's no freaking way this company's going to fail. It won't happen. But when I looked up after 2 years, we had all authored something that it was crazy what happened, because we distinguished ourselves as the place to be, to work. And it was a social compact that I asked the employees. I said, listen, I'm not Amazon. I'm not but I can compensate you in all the ways that you've asked. So I started teaching. They got my James JD MBA type. I started teaching employees on town halls. I'm like, well, I can give you this. And so like, oh, we really like that. So there were other things that were part of the compact. And I get it. That's what I said earlier. There's a certain floor of cash compensation that has to be. But I think that the thing that we tend to do in business and in life, we're not looking at the denominator, because like in physics, we know that the denominator of every important equation is time. So that time component to things, of measuring that as well, that ratio is important. And so that's what you're saying about those are some things, right? That it's how do you measure intangibles, which is kind of what I do.
Well, and I think when you talk about the education piece, trusting our teams to understand those type of things, so that when we educate them, they are more invested because they understand, and they have a bigger picture of what the goals are, and so they're invested in it, and they're going to work harder because they're going to feel like they're a part of something.
Can I say one more? See, I think one more thing before we lose her is I think from a financial product standpoint, I would hope that the people who work in this industry, like you would think that, at least for me, I focused a lot on healthcare. We weren't the biggest companies, but I made sure that we had the best healthcare. Like, it was expensive, had to be the best. The thing that I didn't do as good a job that I was working on too, though, is like for this long term, I think that in this industry, the retirement plans, I'd want to look at that very hard, right, on terms of that, and saying it has to be gold plated, the best, right? It's dignity at the end of life, right? Retirement. And then, number two was, we did a lot of things. There's a lot of things on brain health right now. So like we focused a lot on that. Like there was a lot of time. We built in time to just in the ops to not be running all the time. It was purposeful, like built in of slack.
Slowing down. Yeah.
It was we purposely created slack because
absolutely
it's an intensive job, right? Mm-hmm. It's intensive service. So.
The one thing that you said that is just sitting so delightfully in my heart right now is this idea of creating a social compact with the team members and saying that you're a part of an organization where we care about all of you. We care about your family. We don't just care about what happens to you at work, which is what I think I hear you saying, becomes something special and something powerful. So I just like that a ton.
Well, the industry's set up to be that. It's all local
right.
community. I mean, that's worth a lot of money, isn't it? I think it is.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of
Yeah, absolutely. So Leslie, I'm going to pull you off and I'm going to invite Bob Kramer to come join us.
Thank you.
Bob, welcome.
Hey there.
We actually, James we talked about you briefly yesterday as somebody that he needs to be connecting with. And so I was delighted to see you come and join our conversation.
Well, thanks to Vanessa, I'm here.
Yeah, Vanessa Lou just connected us on an email like 2 hours before.
Exactly. And because of her email, here I am. So there's the power of connection. It's great to meet you in this way, James. Look forward to meeting you in person. I had a comment or observation and then a question for you, James. The comment with regard to building community with staff, my observation is in our industry, which I've been in for a long time, we have tended to try to wall off what happens in our employees' lives, particularly our frontline staff, what happens in their lives outside of our buildings, as if that's not our area. We can't go there and we won't go there. And I've noticed during the pandemic that those employers that not saying we can solve all those problems, but said, I'm listening, I hear all the things you're bringing to work that really wear you down. And those that said, not only I hear, but I'm trying to do something about that. And it's in that context I would raise the issue that I think is just in our industry not getting enough attention. And that is childcare. We overwhelmingly have a female workforce, particularly on the front line, and it tends to be many low-income individuals, and quite often they are single moms and women of color. Yep. And right now, not only daycare is hard to find for anybody at any price. But if you're a single mom on a low income salary and you have kids, it's a Herculean challenge. And with that context, I hope we're going to be seeing a paradigm in the future, for instance, where we're going to see daycare for children of staff, part of campus development and part of how we think about our buildings. It'll have intergenerational value for the residents. It'll say to staff, we care for you and your families in that kind of community sense. And But that relates to my question to you, and that is, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the element of risk. And by risk, I mean willingness to take risk. Where the team was at Ashley Stewart at the time you came in, and where our industry is today, trying to make a few analogies. Some would not see their backs against the wall. I believe that not only low occupancy, but what I think is a long-term labor crisis presents real challenges. And our industry is, not to mention new customer, is going to have to fundamentally rethink our product and how we deliver it. But there's a certain extent to which, is this a disruptive moment? And what's the analogy to your situation you encountered with Ashley Stewart of kind of, I don't want to put it cavalierly, what have we got to lose, but our backs against the wall. And in that situation, you're willing to try things that if things are going well, if you've got the occupancies where you want, and hey, we love the NOI on this product, it's terrific. You don't have a lot of incentive, unless maybe you're a Clay Christensen devotee, to really say, gee, what's the future and what do I need to be doing differently? So I'd love to hear some of your comments around risk and kind of where you were at Ashley Stewart, and maybe to a certain extent, where are we now as an industry? We're hurting. We're hurting as an industry. And, 20 months into COVID, we're not in strong shape.
Yeah. So it's nice. It's great to meet you. And I was reading about you and just, your approach and your why in this industry. It's like, there's a reason why you've done so. It's a why, right? It's the problem you're trying to solve I know what it is. It's really, it's from your heart, and it's very clear, right? It's hard to find people like that. I would say not just with Ashley Stewart, but I'm saying this as sort of a statement and Argentum's been very gracious. So, they invited me down to Mealy Island this December to talk more about, just to facilitate maybe and talk about things. Back 8 years ago at the National Retail Federation, which is sort of the equivalent a bit of Argentum, right? Mm-hmm. I was on the board. They asked me to join the board pretty quickly. And I just said, they were like, well, I heard a lot of what you just said, but things are okay. They're not great. And I just said, do you really think, they were still debating at times, is e-com really for real? And I just said, you don't think that these data mining companies like Facebook, and do you know what's about to come? Mm-hmm. Right. And they're like, well, things. So I think it is this, anyone who's sort of saying, well, look what's happened over the last 8 years to those companies, and that said, well, I think it's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. Yeah. And so rather than being scared, I view it more as it's fun. It's problems. It's fun, isn't it? It's like, well, what are we going to do? And that's my whole thing about the good bank, bad bank thing. You can't be reckless. But you have to be very strategic about taking your bluebird shots and giving them real capital to grow. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, particularly in an industry like this is more theological, philosophical response to your question. We have a real dearth of accountability, in this country, but in leadership too, generally. It's accountability where, particularly industry like this, you're look what you're selling. Look at the product. And to be cavalier that, it's going to, over the next 2-3 years, things are going to be fine for me, and then I'm going to switch jobs. I mean, I see that in a lot of industries, not just this one. Mm-hmm. I would hope that the people attracted to this industry actually really care. That you do care a lot. Mm-hmm. Again, my dad was a pediatrician. My mom served as a nurse in a home for Korean veterans to take care of the GIs who saved her life as a little kid during the Korean War. I grew up in that type of household. I think that caregiving CEOs, this industry deserves that type of leadership. And then, from a back against the wall, I view situations like this more like a Harold and the Purple Crayon thing. I enjoy when you have 8 systems in one, and you're basically saying, and this is all this neuroplasticity, right? That's being done with it, just to be able to draw a new picture and say, why wouldn't it be this way? Mm-hmm. And what happens is that some people say, oh, it can't happen. They leave. you know, Ashley Stewart, we didn't really fire many people. Like people just, I was like, you don't have to stay. But the people who stayed and who came, they're like, oh my gosh, like we can draw a new world, a new design. Why wouldn't we do this and do a better job servicing the people that we're serving? The collectivist nature of what we're talking about too is, I think this existential crisis, I get greeted much more warmly with some of the things now than I did before COVID, because everyone's lived through it. And I just said in my website, Red Helicopter, I asked, do you think life and business are that different? Like, aren't you tired of coming to work, pretending to be somebody, and then shutting off your home life? Like, that's not possible. And it's clearly not possible anymore.
Yeah.
And so we do care about, I care deeply about the people that I am involved with. It doesn't matter if they're in a work setting or a personal setting, right? Like this industry should over-index that, I guess, is my point. And I think if people have the courage to do that, it will unleash the goodwill in your company, top to bottom. And you will find that there's so many prophylactics that are in your P&L that you're spending to basically, when you're treating employees as a potential liability, the amount of money you're spending on that can fund some of the pay raises that everyone wants to have, or some technology investments. It's there. I know it is. This is what I do for a living. I can see it, right? It's like the whole attitudinal adjustment of what is a liability, what's an asset. I have a feeling that this industry, many people still treat their employees as the mindset it's a liability. If they're an asset, you can see what happens. It triggers a whole different flow in your operations.
Well, I don't want to use up any more of your time, but that's fascinating what you just said, to sort of take that deeper with regard to seeing employees as assets. We give that lip service. I would argue that our actions oftentimes have not followed through on that. Yeah. And I think when we do follow through on it, we get incredible loyalty. It's incredibly great for people want to work there. And so, yeah, I mean, totally agree. Look forward to chatting with you about it more.
One more thing before you leave. The other thing about the work-life thing, if you have that mindset with your own employee base, and you know the old adage, you can't give advice if you can't do it yourself. Once that mindset happens, you realize it actually leads to a lot of creativity on your technology and brand extension. When I was saying about extending the ecosystem of what is senior living, because you're starting to go out of the four corners of your business and or the infrastructure that you're thinking about, the world expands. And you realize, wow, I should have a relationship with before in a different way, in partnership with this company. It completely. And if you do it with partners and friends, it's not cost prohibitive because it's mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
So Bob, one of the things I want to say before I turn you loose, and Jack Cumming is there. He's a resident in the community, and so it's completely appropriate that Jack, that you have the last word as we close out this conversation. But about 4 years ago, Bob and I and a number of others spent a day and a half sort of rethinking down in Arizona what might be for senior living. And it was a great conversation. I don't know whether we really particularly moved the needle, honestly, because at that point in time, everybody was kind of fat and happy in the industry. And I don't know whether this will go in any place, but one of the things that James and I talked about yesterday was maybe reconvening another group like that after the first of the year to really imagine what we could really do by leading differently, by treating our people, by having a social compact. And so I would just sort of put this out there that if this is something you're interested in doing, I would love to hear from you. No promises that it's going to happen, but I think that we are, as Rebecca and my team says, we're on this precipice, and we can either fly off this precipice or we can crash off this precipice. And there's tremendous opportunity out there. So,
well, my answer will be in by way of just stating that simply by figuring out where we can cut expenses, we will not solve our way out of the current challenge. that just looking for ways to save money because, gee, we're spending more money over here on wages, that's not going to be a long-term solution. And that's short-sighted thinking. And so in that sense, I just totally agree with James. We got to take a whole step back and think, how do we think about this differently? So thanks.
Absolutely. Bob, thanks so much. I'm going to take you up and bring Jack on.
Good,
and
all right.
Do that.
Oh,
Welcome, Jack. So I'm going to do just a short introduction. Yeah, you got to make sure you're centered there. So Jack is a, I don't even know how to, Jack is a very close personal friend. He is a mentor. He is a resident in the senior living, in a senior living community, and he is part of my team. So, and he is our wise elder statesman and teaches us so much every day. And so, Jack, tell us what you're thinking.
well, I really love your story, and I love where you come from, and I love the vision that you bring. And I keep hearing stories of people who want to make a fresh start. I've been a resident for 15 years. And the reason why I'm active is because when I came in, I was surprised that people didn't see that residents too are an asset. I mean, we pay the money, but we're excluded. So, and that bias toward residents is something that could be blown up. So when I was listening to you, what you did with your business life, looking beyond the standard parameters, I thought, wow, I hope you will bring that thinking to this industry. The big question is whether the industry will be able to change itself that radically from within, or will the industry have to be disrupted from without? There have been some companies that had the scale to possibly have done that, but they've tended to fit within the narrow constraints of the way we educate people today. We tend to have people majoring in programs that are vocational, so they learn the narrow authority of how it's always been done, and they don't have the vision that you brought, looking outside. So one of the things that we're really leaving on the table are the prospective residents. You alluded slightly to that by saying bring in people from the outside. But most people, the big share of this market, are not coming to these communities. And that's something that we really need to change. And I think that the disruption of COVID really gives us a chance to introduce a new era, a new epic, a new way of thinking in which our customers are not secondary. They're not the bottom of the totem pole, but they're valued and they're really resources. We have human resources department. The human resources department don't include residents who are living there. They're human too. And so I'd really be interested in that. I was also interested, you moved away from accounting. Accounting used to be a principal profession. I think you'd agree that with codification.
I'm an investor. Let me ask, like you're on with Ashley Stewart, for instance, I just using that as an example, our customers ended up becoming our most valuable marketers.
Yeah, exactly.
And it showed up in all of our return on ad spend reports, and it was real. Like we didn't ask them; they wanted to. They said we are so happy, we believe in this, and they started inviting their friends.
So there's a secret sauce just in reversing that. But
and
also,
we tracked it. And the other thing that was fun is that we ended up training a lot of our customers on mobile telephony and social media. And I think that it was a fun, because we had some customers who didn't have smartphones or didn't. And we said, have you ever seen this? And they would learn it together. So it became like a fun learning experience. And it relates to what Bob was saying too. There was this big company that I actually about 4 years ago, I actually asked them, why aren't you giving up space and putting in or doing a deal with a third-party daycare center?
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't you giving your employees a space to bring their children in? Like, everyone's going to want to work there.
Yeah.
And in
No,
this industry, you have the double bonus, like to have young children around with the residents. Like, it would be.
Well, I probably shouldn't have told you that I'm a resident, because immediately you start seeing a certain box. And I'm also an actuary, so I'm a numbers guy like you are. You're a numbers guy at Fundament, and at one time you could work with accounting numbers. Now I work from the cash, and I build it up, and I try to look for the hidden resource. I look at the pension plan, look at everything. But I'm also an historian. I went to graduate school in history, so you bring both of those sides together. And I think there's so much potential in this industry to really meet a human need, but we don't meet that human need until we are empowering the people who make it run and listening to them and giving them the voice. And now that's not so. What happens if you don't do that is people only come when there's no alternative. So an industry that began really in 1972 with a revenue ruling from the IRS, the industry that began in 1972 and grew rapidly because people thought it was one thing, but because of the internal mindset that they just give care at the end of life, it's shrinking now back to be no more than assisted living. And because of the advance of medicine, the time of dependency before death is reducing. So you've got really you've got your numbers, your market dynamic going in the wrong direction, and you're saying, well, gee, why don't people understand us? Why aren't they coming here in droves? After all, we serve old people, and don't you know you're old? Well,
so Jack, I'm going to stop you. We are over time. James, this has been a fantastic conversation. I think it sort of came through, but the one thing I want to sort of close with is that in talking to you, your passion for grasping onto this industry and looking at how we make it better. I am just so enthusiastic. I look forward to further conversations in the coming weeks and months about how we completely transform the industry. So for all of you who've been with us for the entire hour, thank you very much. Thank you for what you are doing. There's so much more we could be talking about. Any last words?
No.
Wait. One thing. How do people find you?
They can find me at redhelicopter.com. I didn't get a chance to tell that story here, but they'll hear it. I've got a TED Talk coming out soon, which will be pretty cool if you could help share that. It's a lot about this. It's not for this industry specifically, but it's just maybe a different way of capitalism, maybe just a little bit of a different way.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your passion for people. I guess that's the thing that I would say. Thank you very much for watching.